This is my master of the obvious comment for the day. My name is Paula Bontempi. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School of Oceanography here on the Narragansett Bay campus, and I'm really excited to be joined by three fabulous women to kick off our celebration of Women's History Month. So this is the third of our Spring 2023 lecture series. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to attend. I know how hard it is sometimes with an evening event, but we're thrilled you're all here. And certainly one thing I want to say, and I always make sure I say this, is thank you to all of the taxpayers for voting yes on one. Hopefully you'll have gotten a chance to walk through our campus, if not tonight, then another time, to look at some of the changes that are underway, including our new pier, thanks to the voters in 2018 on phase 1, and then phase 2 will begin very soon. With some bid work, and then we hope to break ground on what's to be the start of phase 2 later this calendar year. So it's very exciting. I think the other piece we're very excited about is the development of the Ocean Robotics Lab, which will happen later this year. We'll break ground on that after the site work. And then hopefully at the end of 2024, we will welcome our new ship, the Narragansett Dawn, which is very exciting, and we'll pull up to our new pier, which should be finished sometime later this month. So thank you to everybody for your support there. The next and final event in this series is going to be on April 26th, just a little infomercial from 5:30 to 7. The event is actually from 6 to 7 in that slot, with the focus on local and global climate change impacts, especially focused on the oceans. So tonight's event, as I said, kicks off Women's History Month, which is exciting, and we're really excited to explore the diverse experiences and contributions of women in ocean science. And we have three fabulous women up here who I thank for joining us today. The panelists are going to start the evening by telling us about themselves and their research, but first I'd like to introduce them. First, I have Katy Croff-Bell, Ph.D. from GSO in 2011. She's the founder and president of the Ocean Discovery League. Next is Fenix Garcia Tigreros, sorry, did I say that properly? An assistant professor at the Graduate School of Oceanography. And third, we have Becky Robinson, who goes by Becky. And she is a professor here at the Graduate School of Oceanography. So thank you to the speakers for coming and for all of you for spending time together. And with that, I'd like to break into the introduction that each of the panelists is going to give for themselves, first with Becky.
Oh, we're going to start with me. Okay, hi.
Yes.
I'm Becky Robinson. Like Paula said, I'm a professor of oceanography here at GSO, and I came to oceanography by way of geology. So I studied geology, and I had the opportunity as a young student to go to sea for the first time, get my hands dirty, play with mud, and that was sort of it for me. And I have been here now since 2005. My marker of time is sitting up in the audience. I won't out her, but she was born within a few months of me arriving here. And so it's been 17 years. And I've been sort of expanding and changing my research focuses over this time. I'm all things nitrogen tend to excite me, and so I came here primarily working on the history of the oceans and the nitrogen cycle in the oceans. And I got interested in sort of nitrogen cycling in Narragansett Bay and human inputs. And so now I like to think that I work on sort of the grand chemical cycling of nitrogen and carbon on timescales that range from sort of years to millions of years. I guess the only other thing that I think is important about my career or my trajectory is that now that I'm kind of a senior woman in oceanography, I love doing science, but I also really just like interacting with young, sort of new women in science and training people in science, and sort of maybe I take more pleasure in that aspect of it than in my own sort of research approach.
All right, welcome Becky, and thank you. Next we have Fenix.
So yeah, that's me. I don't know if
Yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah, they're behind you, yep.
I had no idea.
I'm sorry.
I was like,
I know we need like a monitor here.
I could have explained them.
So I have a couple of slides, more than Becky, apparently. But yes, I think this slide, I just wanted to summarize overall like a little bit of what my work has been. So I joined GSO like 9 months ago, 6 months ago, I don't know. It's very recent. And the overall scope of my work, I say I'm a chemical oceanographer or also aquatic chemist. So I move between the ocean and lakes, as shown in this figure. So if you could go to the next slide. But I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia, which is a city that is nested in the Andes Mountains. Colombia is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, and it's also one of the countries that has been confronting climate change and is supposed to suffer the impacts of climate change the most, also by its location. So I have different pictures that I've taken from Colombia, and just you go from rivers to beautiful ocean. So to me, something that I've been able to experience through my lifetime is the impacts of climate change in my country. And with that, that's basically one of the heart of the work that I do. So I'm interested in looking specifically at carbon. And for part of my work, I've done work in methane, looking at the fate of methane from the release of gas hydrates, so seeps, as well as subsea permafrost. So these are some of the pictures. And then you can see the methane bubbles. So I'm interested on understanding what has happened to that methane once it's released. Is it really impactful when we think of climate change? And if we go for the next slide. And more recently, as I mentioned, I've moved into lakes. So these are like images from field work that I conducted in Arctic boreal lakes. So I switched the nice space on boats, and you can see that we just work from the floats on planes. So that's our lab space when we're collecting samples, as well as just I think it's called a jump boat. And the last picture, I just wanted to mention that there was a black bear over there. So that's something that makes it a little bit exciting and different. You encounter different type of wildlife when working between those two aquatic systems.
All right, thank you, Fenix, and welcome. Katy?
Well, I've never encountered a black bear during field work, but like Becky, I fell in love with going to sea the first time I went to sea. So this is on one of my very early expeditions to the Black Sea. We were looking for ancient shipwrecks. Bob Ballard, professor here at GSO, was leading the expedition. And back then, was one of the very few, if not the only woman on the science and operations team, which was a trend for quite a while. And then, came to GSO, actually. Paula mentioned that I was an alum, defended my Ph.D. right here in this room, which I think is the next slide. Looks exactly the same, but it's been a while since I've been here. And during my Ph.D., which was on geological oceanography, actually, it was on submarine volcanoes and landslides around Santorini. None of which I really do right now, but there's one chapter of my PhD that's finally getting published in the very near future, 12 years later. So published it early. But during my PhD, I got really involved with leading expeditions and planning them. And when I finally graduated, I became the vice president of the Ocean Exploration Trust. And that is when I started running all the expeditions on the exploration vessel Nautilus, which is, I think, the next slide, and creating a lot of opportunities for people, high school students, college students, graduate students, to come out to sea, to be trained, to have these kinds of opportunities, because that seagoing experience is so important for a lot of people in ocean science and engineering. And so spent a lot of time at sea, with Hercules and Argus and telepresence, and it was awesome. But then in 2017, I left OET and started up a group called Open Ocean, and this was an initiative at the MIT Media Lab up in Boston. And it was an opportunity for me to take a step back from being a spreadsheet jockey and moving 300 to 400 people around the world to different ports to and from Nautilus, and actually kind of take a step back and think about deep sea exploration and how we do it. And coming to the conclusion that it is extremely expensive, which I think we all know. And as a result, it's very exclusive. And it's also pretty inefficient if you take a look at how much area of the seafloor we actually see in a year with the tools that we're using right now. So while at Open Ocean, we started a whole bunch of different pilot projects, some of them to do with the efficiency of exploration. So how can we create lower cost tools to be able to cover larger areas faster, as well as ways to broaden the community and make these kinds of tools more accessible to more people around the world. And a lot of the projects that we started there, I brought along with me to the Ocean Discovery League, which is a nonprofit organization that I launched about 1.5 years ago. So in the middle of a pandemic with a newborn is a really good time to start a nonprofit. But it's been going really, really well so far. So we brought some of the projects that we started there, including some low-cost sensor systems. So this is a sensor and camera system. If you can go to the next slide. So the mission of the Ocean Discovery League really is the sort of culmination of my work at MIT. And we came to it to really accelerate deep sea exploration and research through creating lower cost, more accessible ways for people to participate in this very important part of oceanography, to go to the places that have never been seen before so that we can do this more hypothesis-driven research, because there's so much that's been so unexplored. So we have 3 main areas of our work. The first is low-cost sensors and systems. So how can we break down the cost of just collecting data in the deep sea? The second is how can we accelerate data analysis? So there's tons and tons of data that is impossible to find. And if you can't find it, you can't even start to analyze it. And then bringing all those things together with capacity and community development. So how can we broaden what it means to be an ocean explorer all over the world? There are so many communities that have been excluded from this field for so long. And so how can we train people and make these kinds of tools accessible and available to them? So that's what we're doing right now, and it's really exciting to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Katy, and welcome. So I'm really honored to be the moderator for this evening, and I will start out by asking our panelists a question or two, but please feel free, if you have questions, to raise your hand. I think this would be a lot more fun with interaction with the audience for sure, including those online. All right, ready? So here we go. So I had written questions, and I think I just rewrote a couple of them based on your answers. So this will be fun. No, you can't cheat and look at my paper. I see you trying.
It's okay, I'm basically blind.
So I guess my first question is, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I went through all kinds of phases. I wanted to be a lawyer for a while, I wanted to be a doctor for a while. It was all the usual things that people tell you could be or want to be. I didn't find out about oceanography or ocean engineering, which is what I studied as an undergrad, until I got to college. I thought I was going to go into biomedical, biotechnology when I was applying to colleges. So it was brand new for me by the time I got to college, and just had opportunities to go on expeditions and have these kinds of experiences that as soon as I did, that was it.
Oh, that's great. Fenix?
I don't remember. I need to ask my parents. I often see these questions in interviews, and I'm like, I don't really remember. But I think similarly as Katy, so my undergrad is in chemistry, and I really wanted to do, my focus was environmental chemistry. So I was in a chemistry program, but I was doing a lot of research in environmental focus projects. And it was not until an internship that I found out that you could actually study the ocean. So I think I had a very strong connection with the ocean since I was very young in Colombia, and just being able to mix the lab component, like I really enjoy working in the lab, but then also just being out in the field, to me that was like, that's perfect. So I think that that's how I ended up going into oceanography.
So the field work really drew you in.
Definitely the field work.
How about you, Becky?
I think like Katy, I didn't know until I went to college and I started to explore, but I almost applied to vet school the last year of my Ph.D.
Little known fact for Becky's advisor out there right now.
Who is a GSO alum. But yeah, so I don't know that I ever knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. But here I am.
Oh, no. And
Old.
no, I think we're all very lucky that you all took the trajectories that you did. So let me ask you this then. You all became oceanographers. You all had those moments that really inspired you. If you could pursue any project, research or otherwise, any proposal, like for example, that you could write, forget about money, what would be the project that you would pursue? Any thoughts?
So I think like for me, and I guess it's just again a little bit biased from my background, is oceanography still is very underdeveloped in South America, especially in Colombia. If you focus on, even if you focus on chemical oceanography, like the focus that exists is looking more like a pollution. There is not much work at looking, for example, at the impacts of climate change and on aquatic systems. So I think to me that would be just working on a lot of what I've been doing, just looking at the transport of carbon from aquatic to coastal systems from both oceans. That is the Caribbean and the Pacific, which they're so different population-wise as well, and what the impacts of people.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
How about you, Becky, Katy? Any thoughts?
No budget?
No budget. Nope, forget it. Forget about money. Your dream proposal, your philanthropists are listening.
Wait a minute, is this for me? Because I think I would, I mean, right now,
Either. If you had more than one answer, also acceptable.
I would fund the development of a new drill ship for scientific ocean drilling in the United States.
And what do you think is the big motivator there?
I think much of what we know about the history of the oceans and how the oceans work has come from scientific ocean drilling, and the current ship is being retired, and there's a lot more science to do with really important drivers like understanding climate in past warm periods when CO2 was higher and temperatures were a few degrees warmer. We have no other archives on Earth that can give us that look at a warm climate. The fact that we can instrument fault zones and understand the amount of energy that happens in large earthquakes and try to sort of maybe not prepare for them, but figure out ways to instrument them and get early warning systems. I think there's a lot of benefit to society that we haven't exhausted yet, and so I would buy a new drill ship, but that's, you know, $1.5 billion maybe.
I'll see your billion and raise you a quadrillion.
Okay. I didn't talk about outfitting it yet. That's just the ship.
To just look at the entire seafloor one time. It's going to take about 10,000 years and $1 quadrillion at the rate we're going.
But we can put your gliders and stuff on the drill ship when we're in really weird locations.
That'd be awesome.
It's like a good stationary hub.
And. Yep, absolutely. But it can't just be Americans and Northern Europeans who are on the team to do this. It has to be everybody.
Agreed.
So that's interesting. So Becky, did you have something else that was on your mind other than the drill ship?
No, I think I'm going to stick with my drill ship.
Okay, that's all right. No, that's great. So, so if that's your dream proposal, your dream, yes, Katy, go
Can I
ahead.
add another
Yep,
dream? As
of
long
course.
as we're dreaming here. There's a funder paying attention. I want money to hire the women that have been harassed so much that they don't want to go to sea anymore, so that we can do this.
So that's a really important point. It struck me that you mentioned being in my middle-aged brain. I'm going to call myself middle-aged instead of senior. That you said you were the only woman on the science operations team when you were doing that kind of work, sort of in the last decade-ish time period, maybe 15 years. And it struck me as really hard to believe that people still say, women in ocean science still say, my God, I was the only one on this field campaign. I was the only one on this ship. Like, that is something I said, in the 90s. I'm in the 80s. I'm surprised that we still say that today. Do you have thoughts about why that might be, the three of you? Or have you thought about that? Do you experience that?
I think it's definitely gotten better in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
That was back in, not quite, that was in 2000, the photo, so that was 23 years ago. And yeah, I'm pretty sure the only female engineer on that team, and was for several years, and it's gotten better. But things happen at sea, and not good things happen at sea, and it's tough. It's really tough.
And do you think there have been, steps taken recently, or what do you think has made it a more hospitable environment for, gender identity to go to sea? Do you think there have been changes, whether that's just awareness and then building field plans, or where do you think the success might be there, or the opportunity to do more work?
Well, I think partly it's just having more women on the science team, not having just one. When I was overseeing all the Nautilus staffing, before I was responsible for it, 17% of the science and operations team was female, and by the time I left, 40-something% was. So we made huge strides in that 8 years or whatever it was. But I don't want to take up the entire bit.
Yeah, no, I just want to say that it's the commitment to, and I think that the same thing has to be done with other elements of diversity, but it's the commitment to actually recognizing that there's a disparity and then doing something about it. So in scientific ocean drilling, when Lamont Doherty took over in 2010, it was maybe sort of in the 38% women sailing, and it is now 56% women. And it was, gender parity. It's in applications, it's invitations to sail, and it's across the board. And so I think that the people are there, they're interested in going to sea, but with that transition to more women, the environment becomes safer and it becomes more inviting for women to go to sea, right? So there's this positive feedback that happens by making it. But I also think we need to do better at training before people get to sea. What do you expect? What's it like to live on a ship with a whole bunch of people? How do we act? How do we respect people's space, people's beliefs, people's needs?
All really good points.
Yeah, 100%. And there have been a lot of great papers that have come out in the last few years. There's one last week in Oceanography that was published that goes through all the steps in terms of planning and policies, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the one thing that's really missing still is the accountability. And when things are reported, oftentimes nothing is done. And then you're still putting women, especially, but also other minorities into positions that are unsafe. And if they have to make decisions between the thing that they've been training for and doing and love and their own personal safety at sea, and they've got to make that decision, that I'm not even going to say out loud what I think about that, but it is terrible and unfair.
it strikes you that, you know, I wonder if men ever thought about this or had this type of conversation, right? Is that we have to think about that. And they might, but I don't know. It's mostly women, you know, I hear talk about the challenges of being in the field. And I experienced something very similar when I was at NASA with like the aircraft fleet, you know, that, you know, the men had a restroom, but there was no restroom for the women on board. Right, because they weren't used to women flying on some of the planes.
Right.
Something that got rectified, but I mean, still to think about that some of the, you know, that there is professional used equipment out there, infrastructure, you know, that may not be well designed for mixed representation and gender identity is hard to believe, you know, that we still face that. But it is, I think, the awareness, it's correctable. You know, that's the thing that really strikes me too. So
It is, but changes have to be made. People have to be accountable. If
Yes.
you harass someone, you're fired. Like,
yeah,
there's no excuse to
The
send
zero
that person
tolerance.
back out on a ship and put someone else in danger.
yep,
That's not okay. And
Mhm.
I still hear stories now, and things are still happening,
yep.
and it's
No.
not okay.
That's a good point. So does anybody from the audience have a question? Yes.
You mentioned that if like policies regarding people harassing people should be like, that's a no-go, and I strongly agree with that, and I do find that sometimes in academic programs they're often feeders for people who are, for the first time going out to sea, don't follow that same policy either, and that's a big problem with different university settings. Can you
Mhm.
speak on how maybe your experience has reflected that, or what you think moving forward for programs that are going to be feeding into an environment where if you want that expectation to be harassment is out, then how do we start implementing that into our settings that are feeding into that setting as well?
Yeah, that seems to be one of the major areas of confusion, is that you have like a ship operator and then a scientist from this place and an intern from this place, and there's a lot of confusion and people don't report because a lot of times they just don't even know how to report. Who do you report that to? So I think that having very clear guidelines on what that structure is, and probably it comes down to the ship operator doing that and enforcing it. Because yeah, you've got people coming from all different places, all different backgrounds, all different cultures, all kinds of stuff, and it can be confusing. And some of the, there's the Women in Ocean Science, I think, there's a paper, I wrote it down, it's right here. Women in Ocean Sciences study, there are 1,000 respondents, and they were asked many questions. One of them was whether or not they would feel comfortable reporting if they were subject to harassment or if they witnessed it, and more than half said no, because oftentimes it will put them in jeopardy of their career, or sometimes, you know, it's a person in a position of power who's doing the harassing and they don't feel comfortable doing that. So yeah, it's the accountability when it comes down to it.
Other questions from the audience? Yes.
So most of you didn't even think about this field until you were in college or older. What are your thoughts for introducing this field to young girls?
Okay. Did I mute myself? No, I'm not muted.
But you're red.
My battery might be dead.
Unfortunately, Katy probably has the best answers because she's worked with students that are younger than college age, probably more than us. I mean, I don't know how much experience you have for.
Very little.
Yeah.
With students who are younger than college age?
Yep.
Like,
I mean, I love it. I think it's awesome, and I really want to encourage students to do it. But, you know, when we think about issues like this, am I okay? Okay. In some ways, it feels unfair to tell girls and young women that, you know, this is an awesome career, you should do it, and then go on a ship and be harassed. I mean, it's not everybody goes through that. A lot of people go through that. So I think that we need to do both things. We need to continue encouraging girls and young women, and there are tons. I don't think the inspiration is a problem right now. I think that where
people sort of get off the train is if they have these kinds of bad experiences. And another big issue is childcare, and dealing with families and being in a field where, you know, during the period of your life when you're supposed to be having babies, you're also supposed to be cranking out publications and going to see and collecting data and going to conferences and doing all these things that they're in conflict a lot of times, and there aren't resources to deal with making sure that women and young families have the resources they need to support the families, but also that they have a long and, you know, and excellent career.
I might suggest the Girl Scouts.
Yeah.
For many years, I worked with the Girl Scouts. And, but it's also the place where girls have to also find their voice. And I'm hearing you say that, you know, 50% don't want to report. That's not okay. So somehow, in addition to this field, there's got to be a way for girls to start feeling okay about sharing the things that are not okay.
I completely agree with you, but in a lot of cases, the things are reported and nothing's done about it. So that doesn't encourage that person to report again. It doesn't encourage their friends to report, to put themselves into vulnerable positions where they're reporting something bad that happened to them, but somehow they might feel responsible for it. And they might be, you know, putting their careers in jeopardy because they're reporting, but they don't see anything happening, and so why would they do that again? It's tough.
Fenix or Becky, do you have thoughts about this? Engaging the younger generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Katy said, inspiring the younger generation is not hard, and you know, everybody wants to be a marine biologist when they're in high school.
Exactly. That's the easy part. That's the fun part.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you can encourage people who are truly inspired to, you know, take on some of these opportunities. But yeah, I don't think inspiration is the problem. There's plenty of young girls. It's keeping them engaged through this sort of middle stage. That's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point. I was a Girl Scout, so I believe in the Girl Scouts 1,000%.
So was I.
Yep, I still have my uniform and my badges, and I look at them like every now and then. That was a really long time ago. And I think that's one way, you know, to sort of, I agree that inspiration isn't necessarily the moment. Like, I find today's graduate students so engaged in, they're socially conscious, they're environmentally conscious, things, you know, maybe because of how I grew up and who I am, you know, maybe a bit of white privilege, you know, I was just blissfully aware of some of the things around me that I feel like is so ingrained in the students now at all ages. You know, my son talks about environmental things. He's 12. I never thought about that when I was 12. But I think that's also where, as the panelists were saying, we have to start normalizing things for people. It's okay to report. This is how you do it. But I think I echo, you know, what Katy said a bit too. There has to be action that comes with a report, what to do with it. And to be perfectly honest with you, and I know we're being live streamed, I'll just say like one comment is that I sit on a NASA panel that has to do with unidentified anomalous phenomena, the new phrase for UFOs, and even people who have witnessed strange things feel like they can't report because they'll be crazy, they'll be nuts, no one will believe them, they'll be ostracized. Like, you could take out so many examples and that culture is just there. So how do we pivot that, right, as a global community? I would guess there are more people for reducing those pressures than there are for applying them. So how do we make ourselves the maximum voice, you know, the majority heard? And that's something I think we can start teaching the younger generation early.
And I think it's really important that it's not just teaching the girls.
Right.
Right. So a lot of the trainings around going to sea put all of the onus on everything on the person who is the victim. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to change that. We need to train everybody, if you see something, you know, obviously don't just out people, but follow up, make sure people are okay, and help facilitate the reporting when it wants to happen. I think we are very good at like looking away, and we need to train not just our daughters, but our sons and our whole community.
The community, yeah.
Yep.
Yes, Yika.
I have it's a related question, but because you were talking about what are the barriers and what you experience, so my question is, what are the strengths you have that you actually are now the successful researcher in this field? So what do you think are your strengths, and what you would encourage? Like, what are the strengths you think might be like useful to build up for like younger women scientists, or like everybody?
Can I start first?
That's hard.
It's a very difficult question.
Sorry.
So I guess if I see it, like, where's some of the strengths that has gotten me here? I would say like dedication and some part of sacrifice. I think, I really like what I do, and I think that has make worth, for example, not being close to my family or being abroad in a different country. So I think that is there was a little bit of just deciding to do what I guess was putting personal over professional, which I don't know if it's a really good quality. And I think probably just dedication. Like I knew that this is what I wanted to do, and just try to focus on doing that. I don't know, I'll have to think more.
I think maybe 10 years ago I would have said that there was a lot of luck involved, but in watching younger people and in training people, I realize it's probably like there's a little bit of an ability to see when there's an opportunity and acting on it, being like, that's what I want, and knowing sort of you're not going to get anything if you don't ask. And so I think that is maybe what helped me succeed.
That's a good answer. Katie, anything to add?
Yeah, definitely a little bit of that, just taking opportunities when I could, and some things were awesome and I loved them, and some things I would never do again, and now I know that, and that's fine because it all, builds your experience. Definitely also a bit of if somebody tells me I can't do something, then by God, I'm gonna do it and do it better. Definitely a bit of that. And in the last 10, 15 years or so, my husband is a huge strength and makes it very possible for me to do a lot of the things that I've done. Commuting up to Boston 2-3 times a week for several years when we had a small child, and going to sea and doing all those kinds of things. So having a partner who has sort of equal share of a lot of things has been very, very helpful for me. And I definitely want to recognize all the single parents out there who have to deal with children and their careers, and making tough choices all along the way.
So let me ask you all this. Can you talk a little bit about your pathway from when you were young into how you got to where you are now, and maybe a little bit about what your dreams are for the future? So how did you get to?
Where do you want to start?
Well, think about that none of you started out saying, "Oh my God, I want to be an oceanographer," from the time you were in kindergarten necessarily. But
right.
how did you wind up where you are? What was your pathway?
So I guess it was kind kind of parallel paths. I grew up in San Diego. I loved the ocean. I could swim. I was like falling off a diving board before I could walk. So like definitely had a tie to the water for as long as I can remember. Also really loved math and science in school, but never saw that there could be a connection until I got to college, and that's kind of where it clicked.
And then from there, how did you wind up at GSO?
From there, well, found that ocean engineering existed, which was awesome. All my friends thought that they were like, what are you gonna do with that? Be a lifeguard, be on Baywatch? And I said no, but I didn't really know what I was gonna do with it until my first expedition to the Black Sea, and we were looking for ancient shipwrecks, and that was it. So anytime there was an opportunity to do with exploration or expeditions, that was kind of it for me. After my undergrad, I did the Knaus Fellowship and got to work in the NOAA Office of Ocean Exploration. The very first year it started, we didn't even have an office yet when I showed up in DC in February. So we just walked down to Starbucks and said, hey, we got $4 million. What are we going to do? And we started to build a program. So that was a huge experience for me to see, going from nothing to this amazing program in just a year. And I kept in touch with Bob Ballard over the years. So I had gone on, my first expeditions were with him. And then he was starting up the Archaeological Oceanography program here at URI, which doesn't really exist anymore, but that was in 2004. So he asked me to come and be one of his grad students here. And so that's how I ended up here, and then just continued working on all the expeditions and Nautilus. And OET started while I was a graduate student. And so, yeah, it just kept writing its own story.
No, that's a great pathway.
Yeah.
Well, we look forward to seeing what happens next, Katy. It'll be fun.
Thanks.
How about you, Fenix?
Well, so my life started in Colombia. And then I moved to the US. So I actually moved here with my mother and then another of my brothers. So we moved here roughly for like college. And at that point I didn't really speak much English, so I had to do like the learning English as a second language. So I understand the ESL people.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I went to college, got my degree, discovered oceanography, went on to do masters. I don't know, seems kind of like, and went on to do Ph.D. And I don't know, it's been, then I apply here, and I got taken. No, I don't know what specifically you want me to elaborate.
No, I think, well, I was just curious about the moment in your, either early childhood or when you knew you wanted to go into ocean science, what inspired you?
As a child?
Or whenever it happened,
So I think there was just more like a connection to nature. It didn't have to be specific to the ocean. So I think, as I mentioned in the introduction, there is so many different types of landscapes in Colombia, and my family, I think, they really enjoy going out and be out in the nature. So I think I was exposed to this nature component from very early age, and so I didn't necessarily knew that I wanted to do oceanography, because I didn't know that you could actually be an oceanographer. Especially, I think here in the US is, you get a lot of outreach into schools, and that is like a field that is known that you can study. In Colombia, there is no oceanography program, like in the entire country. So like you can only be a marine biologist. That's as far as as it gets in Colombia. So to me that was something that I never really considered, but I knew that I wanted to focus on environmental aspects, so that's why I was doing environmental chemistry.
Gotcha.
So I think to me it was more like this environmental aspect that drew me, and then I really love the ocean, so that definitely tilted my balance when I was deciding for my graduate school education.
Oh, that's great. That's a great story. How about you, Becky?
So, mean, as I said, it was that first sediment core, so I was an undergrad I knew I wanted to do science, and somebody said, oh, you should go to a women's college because then they graduate more women who go into science than sort of most other schools, like proportionally. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So I went to Bryn Mawr and I did a summer, like a semester at SEA, like Sea Education Association, and we took a sediment core. And I was already a geology major, and I was like, oh wait, I can do the geology of the oceans. This is really cool. And then I went back to Bryn Mawr, and I was still doing like a senior thesis on a river. But it was a river that carried stuff into the Arctic Ocean, and I kept reading about the Arctic Ocean. I was like not that interested in the river literature. And I was like, And so my like supervisor person, the person who was like mentoring me on my honors thesis, sort of gave me some names of people I could talk to for grad school. And I went to the University of Southern California, and it just so happened that the stuff I was going to work on for my master's was material that was a site survey for an ocean drilling program cruise that was going out this summer between my first and my second year of my master's degree. And my master's advisor was this very senior gentleman who happened to have been like the person who met Jim Kennett getting off the plane in the United States. And so he was like, is there any way that Becky could go on this cruise? She actually knows a lot about this material. And so I sailed as a temporary technician on the drilling expedition. So I spent 2 months at sea working, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Funny story so Jim Kennett wrote the textbook, Marine Geology, that has never actually been sort of replaced. And he did it when he was on the faculty here. And he founded the field of paleoceanography, which is the sort of ancient oceanography. And so Jim told me that I should come to the micropaleo lab every day, and he would teach me how to identify forams. So I went for 3 days, and on the third day, he was like, yeah, maybe it's not for you. Yeah, it's not very inspiring when you're like a young master's student, but I knew I wanted to do paleoceanography at that time because I just really liked the idea that it mattered which way the water moved, and it mattered what organisms were living in the surface ocean, and it mattered the structure of the seafloor. All of this stuff mattered, the chemistry mattered, and so just the synthetic nature of it was what I wanted to do.
So you alluded to this, but I'm going to ask all three of you this question. Like, can you describe a moment in your career so far where you were just like, oh my God, this is totally why I signed on, whether it's good or bad, ugly, whatever it is, like just a moment that you thought, I'm so glad I do whatever it is I do?
Every time you find a new shipwreck, it's so cool. Yes.
So what about that, like?
Also,
Okay.
which is totally different from the other thing I want to say. Like that is like, you're seeing something for the very first time that no one has seen in hundreds or thousands of years. It's like, it's a magical experience. But then the other side of it is sharing that magic with especially students. So with Nautilus, there's a telepresence system on board. So we're live streaming everything that we're doing, and you're talking about it, and we can do live shows to classrooms or museums, that sort of thing. And sharing that and hearing the enthusiasm from the kids on the other side is like just an order of magnitude more magical than the finding it yourself. It's really, really cool.
No, that is really neat.
Yeah.
How about Fenix or Becky? Do you have a moment of success, inspiration?
I think I probably have two. So first, I really like being, when time allows, just hang out outside and seeing sunsets and sunrises from the boat. I think that's really nice. And I guess the other part is just like conferences. Like I really enjoy the stimulus that conferences bring, and just like sharing results with colleagues and just having like brainstorm of like ideas. I think it's just like everything start coming together once you're start putting the pieces of the puzzle together along with collaborators. It's like,
It's good energy, yeah.
mm-hmm.
How about you,
Mine's
Becky?
maybe a little bit more like Katy. It's that like feeling, I feel this way when we pull up cores, but I also feel this way when we generate like data.
Mm-hmm.
That I know something that no one else knows, right? It's like, it's not like a greedy feeling, it's an awe-inspiring feeling. And I think we forget about that in oceanography. Like NASA really is banked on awe and wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, NSF has driven into us societal relevance. But awe and wonder is important. It's what inspires the next generation of scientists. It's what inspires creative discovery. And so I think, so pulling up new things and looking at new data just excites me because it's like, you know, what am I going to learn? And then I also really like it when students, and this happens at sea or in the lab more than it happens in the classroom, but when students are like, oh, wait, that's what you mean, right? When the like light goes on. So there's a former GSO graduate student who hated geological oceanography. She had to take it twice, and she made a big fuss about it. And I went to sea with her later, much later after she had finished. And we're like standing on the bow in the Antarctic, and she looks over at me and she says, "That's ice rafted debris." And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Oh my God, I did learn something in that class." but really, like seeing it go on in people's head, I love that. I really like that feeling.
Yeah, that's funny. God. Well, there's definitely something to be said for discovery-driven science, and I think all three of you have touched on it in a number of different ways. I wonder if there are any other questions from the audience? Yes.
As we talked about, there's peaks and valleys of being in this industry. How has your agency in yourself developed as you've been in the field? And were there times in your career where you felt your voice was shrinking? And how did you, or what tools or advice might you have for fortifying yourself through the tough times?
Work with people you like.
Yeah, I think having a good support network is definitely having good friends.
Yeah, that support network is super, super important. And yeah, it is tough because sometimes when you bring stuff up and you're not listened to, or worse, you're yelled at for bringing it up, it can be really hard, and you might want to quit that day. And maybe you will, because it is bad enough to do that, but maybe you won't, and you come back to fight another day. But I think that support network and knowing that there are others out there who do want you to succeed and yeah, who do want you to see, they're out there. So to find the good people who will help you through it, I think is really, really important.
I think there was another hand. Oh, yeah.
We have an online question.
Okay.
Oh, great.
Sorry.
No, perfect.
Was there a time in your career that you thought about leaving the profession you're in now, and what made you decide to stick with it?
Good question.
Well, I did have the vet school application in my desk.
Did you actually submit it?
I didn't,
Okay.
but I requested it, and I started going through figuring out how I could become a Michigan resident, because I was going to go to the Michigan State Vet School, which is really a good vet school. Well, my husband told me I wasn't allowed to. That I invested too much time to just give up at the last minute, and that I should really see this through and see if I, wanted to be an oceanographer. And he was right. I'll give him credit.
You can go first. I'm still thinking.
Okay. I've never wanted to leave the field, but I have considered quitting a job because of something that happened that I didn't approve of, and I didn't want to be associated with a choice that I thought an organization was going to make. Thankfully, they didn't make that choice, or made it in the way that I thought it should be made, and so I stayed. But I remember coming home one night from a meeting and telling Rich, like, I might need to quit my job. Thankfully, it didn't go that way, but yeah, it definitely happens.
Fenix, any thoughts? You don't have to answer.
She just started this job.
But that, I think anyone who's been to graduate school knows that your first job isn't after graduate school, right? Graduate school is a lot like, it is a job, right? It's a dedicated position for an amount of time. It's a challenge, right?
It's also the loneliest job, I think, in science.
It can be. So to the online person, I know I'm not a panelist, but I have two things. I think number one, you're always going to encounter challenges and things that seem like barriers, but I would say really are more like detours, right? In my experience, sometimes these are just people who you believe are literally put on this earth to make you miserable and no other reason. And I can tell you that they and you will find paths forward that either are together or separate, but that will pass, okay? It just simply is how life goes, and then you will learn from that and look back. The negative times, the challenges, those are real learning experience. The things that seem like failures are certainly times that we learn. I think the other thing is, don't be afraid, and I mean this, to either change your job or quit a job or leave a field. That is okay. There are many different ways to work in ocean science that may not be a Ph.D., right? And that there are plenty of ways to get employed and stay engaged if you find that something is not for you. And that is a really hard lesson to learn, and sometimes we learn it and sometimes we don't, and hopefully we learn it early. And some of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life have had like 4 careers by the time they're my age, and I think, oh my God, I've done nothing with my life, and it's just, your choices are important, and don't let anybody sway you from your dreams like that. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
This might be just a little heavy, but I'm so curious about what you think about the role of the ocean has in climate change solutions. Where are the opportunities? What are you excited about when you read about climate solutions that are sort of outside of kind of the norm and what you're doing? Is there hope?
There's always hope.
I think we have Honji to help.
Yeah. I think that we need to work hard on ocean-related solutions to climate change, to carbon dioxide removal. The ocean has been doing us a huge favor over, the last 100 years by taking up a lot of the carbon dioxide that we've emitted into the atmosphere. So we should all thank it for buffering the change that we've experienced so far. And I think there is hope. I'm not sure the ocean is the only place we need to look, but we do have to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and so we should be exploring that with people like Hongji.
Yeah, I think I will probably echo that it's definitely worth exploring. I think that there is still so many unknowns, and even regarding how much will we be able to actually remove if we were gonna artificially make that. But it's definitely not the only solution that we will have to keep in mind. Like, we seems that we need to act in many different fronts if we really wanted to act on climate change. So, yeah.
I'll leave it to the climatologist.
All right, so I know we're near the end. Here's my closing question. What movie will you watch every time it's on, and what's your favorite book that you read? This separates the ladies from the ladies on this one. No, I'm just kidding.
So what was, you said a movie that?
A movie, so sometimes when there's a movie on TV, I don't know who watches TV, it's mostly on demand now, right? But is there one that you would watch every single time it's on, no matter what part of the movie it's at? And then your favorite book or the most recent book you read?
So I think one of the movies that I really liked was the Avatar, The Way of the Water.
Oh, nice.
So I think that was really beautiful. It was just really felt like you were actually in the water, scuba diving. So
I haven't seen it. No, that's
It's really
good,
nice.
good tip.
Pirates of the Caribbean. First one only. Or The Life Aquatic.
Oh, such a good movie.
It's been a while since I watched that one.
Yeah, I need to watch that one again. Look. Well, I've been reading Katy and the Big Snow a lot.
So to me, a book that I'm, so I guess disclaimer, my father is a philosopher, so he gives me homeworks. And a book that I'm reading is called Pluriversal Universe. And it's actually written by a Colombian professor somewhere here in the US, I don't remember where. But it's looking at the different aspects of climate change and how people interact and are trying to adapt, I guess, or the solutions that the like small communities in Africa or rural Colombia are doing. So that's
Very cool.
that's my homework.
That's
Good
great.
book if you guys are interested.
Thanks.
I don't really have a movie that I would watch over and over again.
That's right.
I would read Little Women over
Uh-huh.
and over again, and I can like pick that up anywhere and read parts of it. But so I'm obsessed with the book The Overstory. Has anybody read this book? I love this book, and I will proselytize about it.
I'm writing all these down.
Yeah, it's a beautiful.
I've read it.
You've read it? Did you like it?
It is amazing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. I highly recommend it.
What is it?
The Overstory. It's about trees
It's about trees.
and people and climate change and the world and yeah. Cool.
So that's why it's called Overstory, because
So
Right.
one that I've read,
Yeah.
it was a few years ago now, but Inventing Nature. It's about Alexander von Humboldt, whose name I had heard, and Nautilus actually, before it was called Nautilus, was the Alexander von Humboldt. But I didn't really know much about him. And I mean, it's your classic wealthy white male privilege, got to do all sorts of things all over the world, but the way he drew connections across continents just is incredible. And it's a very well written, very easy to read book. I highly recommend it.
Oh, those are great. I wrote them all down. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming and offer the panelists any final thoughts, any final things that you'd like to say.
We brought up a lot of heavy stuff tonight, and oceanography is not all terrible for women. Yes, we've come a long way, and there's still, I think, a lot of work to do, but it's an amazing field, and I'm really, really very happy and privileged to be a part of it.
Yeah, I think I will say that I think it's been definitely improving. When you think of the gender, I guess, imbalance, I think it's getting better. I mean, from my personal perspective, I would really like to see more diversity. But I feel like that's something that is being recognized, and I know that we're trying to work on. So I guess we need to wait a couple more years to see the trickling effects. Yeah, I don't know.
No. As Katy said, it is a lot of fun. There are some heavy moments, and but there have also been some sort of really uplifting moments for me recently. So going on cruises where it's not just majority women, but there's maybe 1 or 2 men in the science party of 10 or 15, and also, you know, female technical staff, and it's really nice to see it change over time, and to see that we can actually work at something and make a difference.
Well, I, for one, am completely inspired by our 3 phenomenal women to lead the way for us, and I think the best is yet to come. So let's thank our panelists for coming.
They were awesome.
And thank you to everybody for attending, including those online. I hope everybody has a good night.